You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Over the 31 years since I first started researching and writing these useless information stories, I've always done my best to avoid controversy. What that means is that I generally avoid topics like current politics, I avoid religion, and I really do my best to keep my personal opinions to a bare minimum. And without a doubt, there have been occasional moments where I've offended someone, but overall I'd say things have gone fairly smoothly. But one exception to this is a story that I released back in June of 2020, and it was titled The Child Bride. Now, just to summarize it quickly, it's the 1937 story in which 9-year-old Eunice Winstead married 24-year-old Charlie Johns. Yes, you heard that correctly. It is without a doubt a shocking story to read today, and yes, it was quite shocking, to the nation back then. But it turned out to be perfectly legal, and the couple would stay together until Charlie Johns passed away 60 years later. Now, I clearly remember when I was putting this story together. In fact, I wrote into the story some of my personal feelings, but in the end I decided to remove them and just let the facts speak for themselves. And when I was done, I knew I'd written a solid story, and I was a bit apprehensive to release it. And that's because I felt it had the potential to just blow up in my face. And initially all went well, but that was until I placed the podcast up on YouTube recently. All the back episodes went live the same exact day, but for some reason the Child Bride has had more listens than any of the other recordings. And I have to tell you, some of the comments have been downright alarming. One person wrote, "My, she was such a pretty little 9-year-old." Another commented, "What a beautiful story." And then there was, "I am a big fan of Eunice Winstead." That same person also wrote, "You really want her to go to college and become an out-of-control stubborn spinster? Her parents did the right thing by marrying her young. Plus, I am a big fan of hers." Then that troll added, and this is directed at me, with the @ symbol, "You're just jealous that you won't be able to get a marriage at least as half as successful as theirs in these modern times." Now, I know better than to get in online battles with people like this. You just can't win. But a few others have taken up the challenge. In response to her being a pretty little 9-year-old, someone wrote, "You listened to this story and that is the comment you chose to leave? Didn't think it might sound at all creepy?" And to the comment of it being a beautiful story, a reader wrote, "Really? Beautiful how? She was still a child playing with dolls. It's disgusting a grown man would marry a child who hadn't even hit puberty." Now, as I said, I try to keep my personal opinions out of the podcast, but in this case, I have to say I agree with those responders. And I really am grateful to them for fighting this battle on my behalf. I have to admit that my first instinct was to simply make the story disappear, take it down from both my website and the podcast feed. But after giving it some thought, I decided not to let the trolls win, and just keep the story up. What I did do is I disabled new comments on my website, and I have to say that's a first for me, but I'm still undecided about what to do on YouTube. Part of me thinks I should just turn the comments off there also, but another part tells me, hey, leave them up there and expose the disturbing nature of these people. And I suppose time will tell whether or not leaving the story up is the right move, but if it isn't, I guess I'll remove it. I prefer not to, however. Well, today I have another story for you that touches on underage marriage, although I must point out she was not prepubescent. And there's no doubt this is a sensitive topic, but I will say that it's not the primary focus of the narrative. In this case, her age is more of a side note to the bigger picture, so I'm really hoping, that it won't stir as much controversy as The Child Bride did. But of course, I could be completely wrong. This is also a story where what unfolded after the controversy settled is just as intriguing, and I think maybe even more so. So sit back and get ready for the long-forgotten story from 1957 of the woman who was Miss USA for a day. I am Steve Silverman, and this is the Useless Information Podcast.
Useless information.
When I was a little kid, and I'm talking probably under the age of 12, I was fascinated by the Miss America contest. And it wasn't that I had any interest in how each of the contestants looked in an evening gown or their bathing suit. I mean, honestly, I was a bit too young to notice any of that. And I didn't care how talented they were or whether they could even provide a sensible answer to the questions that they were asked. Nah, I think there were really just three basic reasons why I watched. First, with only 3 channels to choose from, there wasn't much else to watch on TV. Second, I was definitely caught up in the hype. They advertised this to no end, and being a New Yorker, I always rooted for Miss New York, hoping she would win the crown each year. And lastly, and this is embarrassing to admit, I wanted to hear Bird Park sing "There She Is, Miss America" at the end of every show. Okay, there's no doubt I was a weird kid. Now, I talked a bit about the history of the Miss America pageant back in podcast number 142. That was titled "The Runaway Miss America." And if you've never heard that story, you really should go back and listen to it. It really is a great story. But one thing I didn't discuss in that story was how the competing Miss USA and Miss Universe contests came into existence. Just briefly, an early sponsor of the Miss America pageant was Catalina Swimsuits. And the contest was great publicity for the manufacturer, particularly during the swimsuit portion of the competition, because it was broadcast on national television. It gave the company great exposure. But in 1951, the newly crowned Miss America, that's Yolanda Beppes, she refused to pose for publicity photos wearing a swimsuit, and Catalina, of course, wasn't happy about that. As a result, Catalina decided to withdraw their sponsorship of the pageant. But since it was such great publicity for the company, they decided that the best thing to do would be to start their own pageant, something bigger and greater than Miss America. And in 1952, they launched the Miss Teen USA, and Miss Universe contests. Their ads claimed that Miss Universe was, quote, the only worldwide beauty pageant, although I should point out Miss World had already been established the previous year. Now, just a little side note, Donald Trump, maybe you've heard of the guy. Anyway, he owned the Miss Universe organization from 1996 all the way through to 2015. A key difference between the Miss Universe and the Miss America contest was that the Miss Universe pageant never placed much of a premium on talent or scholarships, at least not during its early years. Keep in mind that Catalina started Miss Universe and the pageants leading up to it with just one goal in mind, to sell swimsuits. And just to give you an idea of how superficial the contest could be, the July 14, 1957 publication of the Long Beach Independent Press Telegram, it lists the stats of all the women competing for the title of Miss Universe. Below a picture of approximately 75 of the contestants wearing their bathing suits, and it's an image spread across 2 pages, that's how big it is, the stats of each contestant are listed in fine print below. One of those women, and that's the subject of today's story, she's described as follows, quote, Maryland, Leona Gage, 21 of Glen Burnie, black hair, green eyes, 5 feet 9.5, 118 pounds, 36, 23, 36. Sports, badminton, baseball, sings, plays piano, draws, unquote. One really can't get more superficial than that. I just want to point out that I'm purposely including these body measurements and similar comments on physical appearance throughout the story just to show you how sexist the press was back in the 1950s. And I definitely don't want to further objectify the women, so I'm not going to convert any of these measurements into the metric system. I am quite certain that everyone can draw a mental image of what the typical beauty pageant entrant looks like. Anyway, back to the story. Our subject was born Mary Leona Gage on April 8, 1939 in Longview, Texas. And while still a toddler, her parents moved to Wichita Falls, which is home to Sheppard Air Force Base. And just to give you a frame of reference, Wichita Falls sits just south of the Texas border with Oklahoma. Anyway, at some point, her father became permanently disabled and he needed to be institutionalized. Her parents later divorced, her mom then remarried, and eventually Leona, she was now going by her middle name, she relocated to the state of Maryland. And while living there, a woman who modeled with Leona encouraged her to enter the Miss Maryland pageant. And Leona, she was convinced that she didn't stand a chance, But on June 25th of 1957, she was crowned Miss Maryland. Now, technically, today should be referred to as Miss Maryland USA, and that's to distinguish the winner from the Miss Maryland who goes on to compete in Miss America. But either way, Leona was either Miss Maryland or Miss Maryland USA. Coming in second place was 19-year-old Callie Hill, who also was a pageant winner. In her case, she had the title of Miss Baseball. That award had been given to her by the Maryland Amateur Baseball Association. The first paragraph of a story that appeared in the next day's Baltimore Sun began, quote, Leona Gage, a black-haired beauty, amply proportioned, talented, and shopping carefully for a man she can be awfully sure about, last night was crowned Miss Maryland of 1957, unquote. That article went on to say, quote, there's a touch of Texas, too, about Miss Gage. 5 feet 9.5 inches, 35, 23, 36. Miss Gage spent most of her 21 years in Baltimore, but did go to school in Texas. And her mother, Mrs. Walter Briggs, lives there.
I'm overwhelmed and so grateful,
gasped the green-eyed model, who also paints, sings, and plays piano.
It was the answer to all my dreams.
She told the press,
I never dreamed I could win, for nothing ever happened to me like this before.
Leona also added that she didn't have a boyfriend and said she didn't want to marry until she was 26 because at that age,
a woman should be able to judge.
Of course, winning the pageant meant that Leona had the opportunity to go compete in the Miss United States contest, and if she won that, then she would go on to compete for the Miss Universe title. So on July 11th, Leona boarded a plane in Washington, D.C., and upon landing on the West Coast, was immediately caught up in the whirlwind of pageantry. Along with parties and entertainment, Leona participated in a 2-hour parade, and she got to ride in her own float while sporting, you guessed it, her Catalina-branded swimsuit. And then there was a boat ride around the harbor and time to play in the water, once again wearing her signature Catalina swimsuit. The July 17th Baltimore Evening Sun wrote, quote, Miss Leona Gage, Maryland's representative in the Miss Universe contest here, was still in the running today with 14 other beauties left out of 44 seeking the Miss United States of America title at the contest. The 21-year-old Glen Burnie model was selected over other American entrants after appearing before the judges in evening gowns and bathing suits, unquote. Any guesses on what brand they were? The article went on to explain what would happen next, quote, one of these will be chosen Miss USA tonight. The winner will compete against 32 international beauties for the title of Miss Universe. 5 Miss Universe finalists will be named tomorrow night, and the queen of them all will be crowned Friday night, unquote. Well, since I've been focusing on Leona Gage throughout this entire story, it should be fairly obvious that she made it all the way through the elimination process and was crowned Miss USA. Coming in second place was 20-year-old Charlotte Sheffield of Salt Lake City, Utah. An Associated Press article detailing Leona's win noted that, quote, the new Miss USA, one of the tallest girls in the contest at 5 feet 9.5 inches, weighs 118 pounds tastefully distributed on a 36-23-36 basis, unquote. Of course, after Leona won the title, the press wanted to know more about her. And what they learned was that her father had died and she was forced to quit school while she was in the 10th grade to help support her family. Also, the identity of the model who originally encouraged Leona to enter the Miss Maryland contest was finally revealed. It was her 24-year-old cousin, Barbara Gage, and the two of them lived together back in Glen Burnie. In an interview after Leona's victory, again with the Associated Press, Barbara shared how they had to pool their resources to be able to afford a gown for Leona to compete in the contest.
I had $35 and she had $10. We had made money modeling and it was all that we had. We found a dress marked down from $90 to $45, so we bought it, and she won. But we still didn't have any money. They gave Leona a 2-way ticket to Long Beach, so we used both ways so I could come out too, and now she's won again.
Adjusted for inflation, that $45 dress would be about $500 today. They did have another issue, and that is they only had one-way tickets. How were they going to get home? Here's Barbara once again.
We both modeled and we made enough to get along. But I only had $20 when we got here. We figured if Leona didn't win anything, we'd work as waitresses, anything, and make enough money to get home. Now I guess we'll get home.
Well, going back to Glen Burnie would come in time, but there was still one big contest for Leona to compete in. That was for the title of Miss Universe, in which she'd be going up against 32 winners from countries all over the world. Could Leona do it? Well, she made it through the first elimination round and was chosen to be among the top 15 winners. Almost there. Would she make it? The answer is a definite no. That's because she was disqualified from the competition and the pageant stripped Leona of her Miss Maryland and Miss USA crowns. So what could Leona have done that was so outrageous that she'd lose all her titles? First, it was learned that Leona had lied about her age. She told pageant officials she was 21, but in reality she was only 18. In a syndicated Associated Press article, Leona explained her reasoning.
You say you're 18 and people think you have no brains. I've always tried to pass myself off as older than I am.
Now you're probably thinking, that's no big deal. Women lie about their age all the time. In fact, the contest allowed anyone between the ages of 18 and 28 to enter, so she was fine there. So that is not the reason she was disqualified. The real reason that Leona was disqualified was that she was married. She had wed Air Force Staff Sergeant Gene Ennis on February 3, 1954 in Vernon, Texas, when she was just 14 years old. The reason for that early marriage? She was pregnant at 13. By the time she was crowned Miss USA, Leona and Gene were already the parents to two boys. That's 3-year-old Gene Jr. and 2-year-old David Nathan. Now, interestingly, what I discovered was that in 1957, that was the first year in which the contest rules required all entrants to be single. If Leona had won the previous year, then the pageant operators may not have been able to disqualify her. But since this is a Miss USA pageant and not a Mrs. USA pageant, they had no choice but to disqualify her. So how did they discover that she was married? Well, it turns out shortly after Leona won the Miss USA title, a Baltimore newspaper received an anonymous tip suggesting that she might be married. The tip was passed along to a reporter in Long Beach who confronted Leona with the following question. Did you ever hear of a guy named Ennis? And even though that was her married name, she flatly denied it. But good reporters don't give up. The rumor of Leona's marriage had quickly solidified into fact. She continued to deny it at every turn, but the evidence, it was undeniable, especially after her mother-in-law, followed by her husband, and finally her own mother confirmed the truth. By the morning after the top 15 finalists had been announced, that's Friday, July 19th of 1957, a tearful Leona confessed that the rumors were indeed true. Reflecting on the ordeal years later in 2005, she recalled,
I was scared they were going to put me in jail or something. Once my own mother verified, I said, yes, it's true.
So why did she do it? Leona explained.
We desperately needed money. We owe a lot of bills. My husband makes only $300 a month. We live in a rented house. We don't have our own furniture. My 2 children are healthy, but they need clothes.
Adjusted for inflation, that $300 per month her husband was making then is about $3,350 today. And he really didn't seem too upset that she had lost the Miss USA title.
I'm behind her all the way,
he continued.
I'm glad she had it for a day because I'll have it for 364 days.
After her disqualification, the dominoes just quickly fell into place. The title of Miss Maryland went to Miss Baseball. Remember her? Callie Hill? Charlotte Sheffield, who was Miss Utah, was then crowned Miss USA. However, since Sheffield hadn't participated in the preliminary rounds of Miss Universe, she was unable to replace Leona among the top 15 finalists. Instead, Leona's spot went to the 16th place contestant. That was 21-year-old Miss Argentina, Monica Lamas. And here's a syndicated news story announcing the winner.
Long Beach, California, July 19th, Associated Press. A dark-eyed senorita from Peru, Gladys Zender, 18, of Lima, tonight was named Miss Universe. Miss Zender, 5 feet 7 with 36-23-36 measurements, is the first Latin American to win the International Beauty Contest. Her father, Eduardo Zender, is a leading industrialist in Peru.
Following Leona Gage's disqualification, reporters turned their attention to Zender. They were hoping to uncover any scandal in her background. Anything that might grab headlines and sell more newspapers. And what they discovered, well, they didn't find out she was married, but she had lied about her age. It turns out she was only 17, which was too young to compete. Faced with the bad publicity of possibly having to disqualify 2 pageant winners within a 24-hour period, pageant officials desperately searched for a way out of this mess. Well, it turns out that Gladys was 17 years, 7 months old, and according to her father, supposedly it's Peruvian custom for anyone more than 6 months past their birthday to consider themselves 1 year older. So if she's 17 years, 7 months old, she is now 18. And with that reasoning, the pageant sponsors agreed to recognize Gladys as being 18, and that preserved both her title and the pageant's reputation. Meanwhile, Leona Gage's story, it just captured headlines worldwide, and the press continued to seek out more information. One person they really wanted to interview was her cousin Barbara Gage, but no one seemed to be able to locate her. She was, without a doubt, lying low. But when they did finally find her, they learned that she wasn't Leona's cousin at all. Instead, she was a 24-year-old friend named Barbara Mushaw. And Barbara agreed to share her side of the story. She explained that one evening she had a modeling job lined up, but she couldn't take it because she needed to do some baking at her husband's tavern.
One night there was a modeling job I couldn't take, too busy at my husband's place, so I found a girl, Leona, working in a dress shop for $26 a week. I gave her the modeling job. We became friends. I realized she was a beautiful girl and could become a very good model, but she just couldn't get jobs without experience and without becoming known, getting some publicity. I talked Leona into going into the Miss Maryland contest. I put up $35 and Leona $10 to buy a reduced-price dress for her. I told my husband I spent the $35 for myself. Well, Leona won, but she told her sponsor that she was married and had 2 children and would return the crown and withdraw in favor of the second girl if he wanted, but he said no.
Later, as Leona entered the finals for Miss Universe and rumblings of her marriage began to seep in, Barbara telephoned William J. Adams, director of the modeling agency that promoted the Miss Maryland contest. Adams told Barbara that he would take care of things and that Leona should just continue on to hopefully win the Miss Universe title. But after Leona was disqualified, Adams told the press,
"I did not know she was married."
The reality was that Barbara and Leona hadn't put much thought into what would happen if she won the Miss USA contest.
Our only plan was to get out here to Hollywood where beautiful girls can make some good money. She couldn't do it in Maryland. We had no hope of winning. Our plans didn't go that far. It was Leona's idea that I come along. I didn't want to leave my husband, but Leona said she couldn't do it without me. We thought we could keep it covered up by not talking to anybody. But we got caught, that's all.
And covering up is literally what Leona had to do. She feared that if anyone connected to the pageant saw her undressed, they might realize she was a mother, and that would result in her disqualification. So to avoid that risk, Leona always made sure to change in the privacy of a bathroom. Leona not only lost her Miss USA title, but she also forfeited all the prizes that came with it. This included her trophy, tiara, a house trailer, a $2,000 contract with a cosmetics company that would be worth over $22,000 today, and a trip to Europe. All of that was passed on to Miss Utah. The only prize Leona was allowed to keep was the $1,000 wardrobe, and that's primarily because she had already collected the clothing. Meanwhile, the sudden attention from the press proved way too much for Leona to handle. So she did the obvious thing and retreated to her hotel room. Pageant director Oscar Meinhardt said she could stay there as a guest as long as she liked.
After all, she's a young kid. Often a girl is urged and pushed into these things. It seems like a small lie at the beginning. We think she's a pretty wonderful girl and will protect her seclusion as long as she wishes.
While investigating Leona's background, a reporter discovered that her father was, get this, still alive. When he told Leona the news, she fainted. At least that's what the reporter claimed.
I thought he was dead. They told me he was dead.
Leona explained that her father, Frank Gage, had been in a serious car accident, which was later followed by a severe electrical shock while he was working in an aircraft plant. The injuries left him paralyzed, and he spent the remainder of his life in the Wichita County Farm Hospital, and he'd pass away there 4 years later on January 18th of 1961. Anyway, on Saturday, July 20th of 1957, that's the day after Miss Universe was crowned, Leona boarded an airplane for home. Upon her arrival at Friendship International Airport, which today we know as BWI or Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport. Anyway, when she got to Friendship Airport, she was greeted by a friendly crowd of about 200 people. While puffing away on a cigarette, she told reporters,
I'm sorry. I honestly am. I didn't think I'd win. If I thought I had a chance, I wouldn't have gone out there.
And get ready for this. Leona had one more shocking revelation for the press that day. That is that Gene Ennis, whom she married at 14, he was her second husband. And here's how that all unfolded. She was 13 when she met Gene in a drugstore where she was working. He was stationed at nearby Shepherd Air Force Base and was 24 at the time. He commented to a reporter shortly after her plane landed at Friendship Airport.
She was quite a woman at 13 too, believe me.
Okay, yuck. Leona admitted that the reason she was attracted to him is because he resembled a young Frank Sinatra.
That's why I liked him, because I had a crush on Frank Sinatra.
At first, Gene would drive her to church and on errands and so on, but soon it escalated into a romantic relationship. Then, months later, Gene received orders to ship out, but
he said he was going to come back and marry me when I was grown up.
But not long after he left, Leona realized she was pregnant. So she sent a letter to Gene, but she didn't get a reply. And unable to deal with the pressure, she went to the top of a 10-story building in Wichita Falls, with the intent of jumping and ending her life.
But at the last moment, a little voice said, "You'll kill the baby," and I walked back down. I couldn't kill the baby.
Too scared to tell her mother that she was pregnant, Leona confided in a coworker at the drugstore, and that woman just mentioned that she was getting married and suggested that Leona do the same. And she had just the guy in mind. She recommended Edward Thacker, who was another airman at the Air Force Base, and Leona agreed to go through with it. So the four crossed the border into Oklahoma, and a double wedding ceremony was held. Page 10 of the November 26, 1953 edition of the Big Pasture News lists the following under the section titled Marriage Licenses. Quote, Eddie Ray Thacker, 20, Shepherd Falls, Texas, and Mary Leona Gage, 14, Wichita Falls, Texas, on November 11th. Unquote. But as soon as that ceremony was over, Leona realized she had made a huge mistake.
I'd never even held hands with him.
So she immediately went home and informed her mother.
I'm pregnant, but I'm married.
At her mother's insistence, the marriage was quickly annulled. She was then sent off to live with an aunt until the baby was born. At least that was the plan. That's because before that happened, Gene reemerged on the scene, and the two were married on February 3rd, 1954, and Gene Jr. was born on April 28th of that same year. It's certainly no surprise that Leona was unhappy with the direction her life had taken. I mean, think about it. She was pregnant at 13, married twice by 14, a housewife before starting the 9th grade. She had little chance to enjoy a normal childhood. And on top of that, a year later, she gave birth to her second child, And shortly after that, the Air Force transferred Jean to the Baltimore area. Suddenly, Leona found herself in an unfamiliar city, isolated from family and friends, and on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Seeking help, Leona visited an Air Force doctor who recommended that she find a job. Well, that advice led her to work in that dress shop, and there's where she met Barbara Mushaw, and that encounter ultimately set her on the path to becoming Miss USA, at least for one day. Reflecting back in 2005 as to what had happened, Jean said,
She was unhappy. I was young, she was young, and when you're young like that and in the service, it's one of those damn things. You make mistakes and she winds up pregnant. She wanted to be somebody. She was ambitious. She was a beauty queen even before she was a beauty queen.
Upon returning home, Leona had to deal with the fact that she had become an overnight celebrity. One pageant official remarked, quote, "She may have lost her title, but she has $1 million worth of publicity," unquote. Needless to say, Leona was flooded with mail, some of it harsh and mean-spirited, while offers from the stage and screen, they just poured in. As she and Barbara sorted through the proposals, most were unfamiliar to them, including one from the renowned William Morris talent agency, whose significance they didn't fully comprehend. Yet there was one name that she knew, Ed Sullivan. His show in the late 1950s reached an average of 40 million viewers every Sunday evening. How could you not know about him? And he wanted Leona to make an appearance ASAP. Luckily, thanks to modern technology, a clip of her appearance can be seen on YouTube, and I'll place a link to that in both the show notes and on my website if you'd like to take a look. Anyway, she was paid $1,000 for her July 21st, 1957 appearance. That's about $11,200 today. Interestingly, Sullivan was on vacation that week, so comedian Ernie Kovacs was hosting, and he was the one who interviewed Leona. So here's a brief audio snippet of that appearance, and it'll give you a chance to hear what she actually sounded like.
I like that crazy Sullivan. He's out of town tonight. This is Miss Gage, and we're real happy to meet her. We have found out so much about her by reading about her, but this is my first opportunity to ask her some things. Leona, why did you go into the Miss Universe saying you were married when you knew you weren't?
Well, the reason that I did it is because, as I said to reporters, we needed the money. And I didn't go in the Maryland contest to win it. I went in for someone to see me, and maybe I could get modeling job.
Well, what has happened to you since?
Oh, I've received many offers, just at Sullivan Show tonight, and many more, just too numerous to mention. Everyone's been so wonderful.
Well, you must have some particular ambition, Leona, something that you'd like to do.
Yes, I'd like to be a dramatic actress.
As you can tell, she's kind of soft-spoken. Now, I do encourage you to watch the entire clip because not only does she say more, but they also turn the camera toward her husband who's sitting in the audience. The problem was that a brief interview did very little to boost her career, so Leona took the opportunity to showcase her singing on the rival Steve Allen show. However, they asked her to sing Sentimental Journey, a song that she wasn't familiar with. And with minimal time to rehearse, things went south quickly. Leona forgot the words to the second verse and simply froze. Luckily, the Four Coins, a local vocal group, they were able to step in and complete the song for her. Despite that setback, the offers continued to pour in. Actress Jan Shepard, who was hired to help Leona prepare for her first dramatic role in an NBC matinee theater western, told the Baltimore Sun in 2005,
"She was so beautiful and everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon."
On July 31st of 1957, that's about 12 days after her disqualification, it was revealed that Leona had penned a letter of apology to pageant producer Oscar Meinhardt.
I would very much like to say that I am truly sorry for the trouble and the inconvenience I caused you and the pageant officials. The way things happened, I was carried along by a series of circumstances which I had no control over. I hope that you can find in your heart forgiveness and can realize that the way things were, and from my own inexperience, I had no idea of the amount of trouble that the misunderstandings would cause. Again, I wish to express my sincerest regret and wish you and the pageant the continued great success it deserves in the future.
Meinhardt replied,
I think it's a very gracious gesture on her part.
But not everyone was pleased. Miss Baseball, remember her, Callie Hill? She filed a $30,000 lawsuit. That's about $335,000 today. She filed a $30,000 lawsuit against both Leona Gage and the Walters Academy modeling agency that sponsored her. Hill argued that by concealing Leona's marriage, they had deprived her of that paid trip to California, the possible prizes, and of course possibly earning the titles of Miss USA and Miss Universe. In turn, the model agency sued Leona for $100,000. That's about $1.1 million today, claiming that her actions had seriously damaged their reputation. However, I should point out that the press provided no further updates on either case, leaving their outcomes unknown. Well, on December 30th of 1957, again the same year she was disqualified, Leona announced that she was divorcing her husband, Gene. Her plan was to move to Nevada, work on the Las Vegas stage, and of course get divorced there. Gene told reporters,
I guess she doesn't love me. I guess that's grounds enough.
The couple did agree that she would gain custody of their children.
I have no objection to her career as long as my children are properly cared for, and they're very well taken care of.
When their divorce was finalized on February 25th of 1958, it was revealed that Leona was earning $200 a week, or about $800 a month, as a showgirl. Now, her husband, Gene, he was making just $350 per month. And since Leona had the higher income, they agreed that Gene would only be required to pay $25 per month in child support. And that's about $280 per month today. 1 year after her Miss USA disqualification, Leona was still working as a showgirl at the Tropicana Hotel while living in a trailer with her 2 sons. She referred to it as
the happiest time in my life.
And during her first year as a Las Vegas showgirl, she was billed as Miss USA for a day. One of the lines of a song based on the pageant scandal was, quote, I didn't mean any harm, but things got dull on that Maryland farm, unquote. I guess it didn't matter that she had never lived on a farm in Maryland, but then I doubt anyone was checking the facts. The following year, she became part of an act called the 10 Most Beautiful Women of the World. For a short time at age 19, Leona dated Frank Sinatra, but that never went anywhere. Many years later, she reflected back on that relationship.
I didn't talk, I just smoked. I had a long black cigarette holder and I would just sit and just smoke across from him while we were dating.
After this, Leona's life just seemed to be in a downward spiral. On November 17, 1958, Leona married dancer Nick Kovacevic in Las Vegas' Little Church of the West. That union would end in divorce 2.5 years later. Now, a little side note here is that the church is still in operation today. And I did check, and couples can choose who they want to officiate their ceremony. I just love this. A typical minister costs between $60 and $100. But if you want an Elvis or Johnny Cash impersonator, that's going to run you $200. But if you really want to splurge, you can get a mini Elvis impersonator for $250. Anyway, back to the story. At some point, Leona relocated to Hollywood, and it was there on August 5th, 1960, that she was charged with, quote, endangering a child's life. And that was for striking her 5-year-old son David with a belt after he was caught playing with razor blades. She told reporters,
I believe in strict discipline, but with love. I was spanked 50 times harder than I spanked my child. Parents today are not strict enough. That's why there's so much juvenile delinquency.
Leona was fined $25, or about $280 today, for her actions. On September 8th of 1962, she married Gunther Collitz, who went by the professional name of Peter Collins. He is best known for writing I Remember Marilyn, a book detailing his alleged affair with Marilyn Monroe. According to Leona, their marriage unraveled shortly after the birth of their daughter, Cynthia. Devastated, Leona once again attempted suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills. And this will certainly come as no surprise. The couple was divorced after less than 18 months of marriage. By this time, Leona was firmly established in the Hollywood party scene. She claimed to have taken LSD with John Barrymore Jr., lived with ex-Mr. Universe Mickey Hartigay, and he's the father to actress Mariska Hargitay, and she was also close friends with hairdresser Jay Sebring, who would later lose his life during the infamous Charles Manson killings. As for Leona's Hollywood acting career, that would never take off. She did land a role in the 1962 Roger Corman movie Tales of Terror starring Vincent Price, but she had very few lines. Her role as Morella, a woman who died during childbirth and then came back to life, it required her to wear ghoulish makeup and basically lie dead throughout most of the story. She also appeared in a non-speaking role as a call girl in the 1964 film A House Is Not a Home, though the fact that the Internet Movie Database doesn't list her as a member of the cast, I think that hints as just to how minor her role was. Notably, the film also marked the screen debut of another rising star, Raquel Welch. During the spring of 1964, Leona went in search of work and left her daughter Cynthia in the care of a hired sitter, that's Mrs. Beatrice Sloan. But a month later, Leona still had not returned, although I should point out there was some phone contact between the two. Mrs. Sloan, who had since accepted another job, had no choice but to turn Cynthia over to juvenile authorities for care. Mrs. Sloan claimed that Leona had never paid her salary and that the electricity and telephone in Leona's North Hollywood residence had been turned off for non-payment. Well, upon learning of the situation, Leona rushed home from Scottsdale, Arizona, and the whole thing was straightened out. Cynthia was released into her care and no charges were filed. Then, on Friday, October 30th of that same year, Leona was discovered unconscious in a motel room at 7023 Sunset Boulevard, having once again attempted suicide with an overdose of barbiturates. A note that she penned on the motel stationery read,
Strange as I know this may sound, I feel in my heart that to make my exit at this point in my life was the wisest thing to do. I would like to believe that there are a few who will understand. Good luck to everyone. God bless you. Mary Leona Gage.
Leona was transported to General Hospital to recover. She was charged with narcotics possession after police discovered 1/4 ounce or 7.1 grams of marijuana in her left boot. But after learning that Leona had displayed suicidal tendencies several times before, the judge assigned to the case suspended the charges and ordered psychiatric tests to determine if she should be committed to a mental institution. As a result, Leona would spend the next 7 weeks in the Camarillo State Mental Hospital. Upon her release, Leona agreed to be interviewed for a ghostwritten book about her life. She received $900 or around $8,750 today for doing so, although she later claimed that many of the more lascivious portions were pure fiction. The book was titled My Name is Leona Gage, Will Somebody Please Help Me?, which were the first words she spoke after her most recent suicide attempt. The front cover shows a nude Leona clad only by a sheet sitting seductively on a bed, and the book was marketed to an adult audience, and that's exactly where I found a description of it. I went to the Internet Archive, and an ad from the November 1966 publication of the men's magazine Adam reads, quote, This is a shocking true story of a fabulously beautiful girl. She had everything, money, talent, and a movie career, and the title, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. She also had one additional talent, to attract sadists and unscrupulous opportunists. They turned her world into a nightmare of frustration, suicide attempts, drug addiction, and confinement in an asylum. Her storybook career ended in shame and degradation inflicted by an unfeeling society. Her search for love was brutally deflected into lesbianism. Her beauty was distorted by grotesque appearances on a burlesque stage. Her will to live almost completely destroyed. Holloway House Publishing Company, California, 75 cents, unquote. And that's approximately $7.25 today. By the end of 1966, she had made her last movie. And as you just heard, Leona turned to working as a burlesque performer in strip clubs, although she did say she never fully disrobed. She did also appear in 2 television commercials, one for a hand cream and one for a foot cream, but by the 1970s she had turned to working, ordinary jobs. When the press caught up with her in April of 2005, she was back to using her first name Mary once again. She was living alone and had been suffering for nearly a decade from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Somewhere along the line, she had converted to Judaism and had taken a vow of celibacy. She said that her son Gene Jr. and daughter Cynthia had already passed away, and she saw her other 3 sons infrequently. She told the reporter,
"There's really no way this could have a happy ending, is there? Why? Because my dream is dead. Having all my children around the table at one time and me serving them turkey and all the trimmings."
Now, one fact that every telling of her life appears to have wrong is the number of times that Leona was married. They'll report 6, but I count 7. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire list, but I'm quite certain that I'm correct. Her shortest, of course, was to her first. That was Eddie Thacker, which was annulled after the first week. And the longest was husband number 6. That's Alex Kaminer, which lasted for 5 years. Mary Leona Gage passed away on October 5th of 2010. She was 71 years old and was interred in the Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City, California. But Leona was never bitter that the Miss USA title had been stripped from her. In fact, she made sure to watch the pageant on television every single year.
"I did not expect to win. After I did, I was frightened. I didn't know what to do. But I'm most grateful I was Miss USA for a day."
Useless, useful, I'll leave that for you to decide. I have to say I would have loved for Leona's story to end on a happy note, but unfortunately one can't rewrite history. Now, the 2005 interview with Leona and others that I kept mentioning throughout the story, that was titled Forever and a Day, The Long Unhappy Pageant of Mary Leona Gage. Now, I apologize if I mispronounce this, but it was written by John Mostendiek, and it was published in the Baltimore Sun on April 10th of 2005. I do believe that was the last interview with her. It is well worth reading, and I use this as a bit of a guide to put this story together. And if you don't have access to a copy, just let me know, and I can definitely share that with you. I should also add that there are several videos, including her appearance on Ed Sullivan. There's also one where someone goes to visit her grave, and I'll place those up on my website along with the transcript. As you read through the transcript, you'll see I'll embed those videos. So be sure to check those videos out at uselessinformation.org. In closing, just a reminder that the Useless Information Podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network, so be sure to visit airwavemedia.com, and there you'll find a curated selection of some of the best podcasts out there. Anyway, thanks for listening, and take care, everyone. Bye.